I think I don't know who the artist was that you're speaking about, but I think that it's not like there's obviously like the the play sometimes presents as simple, and it's not.
When you carry the story a little further, past the headlines, past the tragedy people already know, something else begins to take shape around Keanu Reeves. Something quieter, but in many ways more powerful than everything that came before. Because the most important part of his life didn't happen in a single moment. It happened slowly, over years, in the way he chose to keep going. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. For a long time after 2001, there was a noticeable pattern. He kept working, he kept showing up, but he rarely spoke about his personal life. Interviews stayed focused on films, conversations stayed light, and when questions drifted toward loss, he would answer briefly, respectfully, and then move on. Not because the past didn't matter, but because it mattered too much to turn into something public. That silence created a kind of mystery around him. People began to project their own interpretations. Some saw him as distant, others saw him as deeply introspective. But what most didn't realize is that silence can also be a form of control, a way of deciding what parts of your life remain yours, especially when everything else is constantly being observed. During those years, he wasn't just surviving emotionally, he was rebuilding structure. And that structure didn't come from dramatic changes, it came from routine, from work, from creative collaboration, from choosing projects that allowed him to stay engaged without losing himself. That's why his connection with Alexandra Grant feels different when you look at it closely. It didn't begin in the spotlight. It didn't grow under public pressure. It developed in private, through shared interests, through conversations that had nothing to do with fame. And that foundation changes everything. Because relationships built in that space don't rely on performance, they rely on understanding. And understanding, especially for someone who has experienced loss the way he has, becomes more important than anything else. It creates safety. It creates room to exist without pretending. What makes their story even more meaningful is the way it connects back to creativity. The books they created together weren't just projects, they were expressions, ways of translating emotion into something tangible. And that process, turning internal experience into external form, often becomes a kind of healing, not in a dramatic sense, but in a steady, ongoing way. At the same time, his relationship with work continued to evolve. The success of the John Wick series didn't just re-establish him as an action star, it showed something deeper about how he approaches his craft. The discipline, the physical commitment, the willingness to train extensively, all of it reflects a mindset that goes beyond performance. It reflects presence. And that presence is something people respond to, not just in films, but in the way he carries himself in real life. There's a consistency there, a sense that the person on screen and the person off screen are not completely separate, that what you see isn't an act, but an extension of something real. Even small moments reinforce that perception. The way he interacts with fans, the way he speaks about colleagues, the way he acknowledges the people around him. None of it feels exaggerated, it feels grounded. And in an environment where image often overrides authenticity, that difference stands out. Then there's the idea of home, not just as a physical place, but as a concept. For someone who spent much of his early life moving between countries, between schools, between environments that never fully settled, the idea of stability carries a different weight. The house in the Hollywood Hills isn't just a property, it represents something else, a fixed point, a place that doesn't shift. And after a life shaped by movement and loss, that kind of stability becomes meaningful in a way that's hard to explain unless you've experienced its absence. It's also where the contrast becomes most visible. Publicly, he exists in a world of premieres, interviews, global recognition. Privately, his life appears much simpler, more contained, more intentional. And that contrast isn't accidental, it's chosen. Because at some point he seems to have understood something that many people never fully grasp, that not everything needs to be maximized, not every opportunity needs to be expanded. Sometimes maintaining balance is more important than chasing more. That philosophy shows up again in the way he handles success. Despite earning massive amounts from projects like The Matrix, there's no visible shift toward excess, no constant display of wealth. Instead, there's a pattern of redistribution, of sharing, of using resources in ways that don't draw attention but still create impact. And that brings the story full circle, because when you look at everything together, the early instability, the losses, the career fluctuations, the quiet rebuilding, a consistent thread begins to emerge. Resilience. Not the loud kind, not the kind that announces itself, but the kind that exists in decisions, in the choice to keep going, in the ability to carry pain without letting it define every aspect of your life. And that's what makes his story resonate, not because it's dramatic, but because it's real, because it reflects something people recognize, even if their own lives look very different. The idea that life doesn't always move in a straight line, that loss doesn't disappear, that healing isn't immediate, but that even within all of that, it's still possible to build something meaningful. Not perfect, not untouched by the past, but peaceful enough to keep moving forward. And when you let that idea settle, the story starts to feel less like a timeline of events and more like a pattern, something that keeps repeating in quiet ways across different phases of Keanu Reeves' life. Not the kind of pattern built on fame or success, but one built on how he responds to what happens to him. Because if you look closely, every major turning point in his life carries the same question underneath it. What do you do after everything changes? In his case, the answer has never been loud. He doesn't reinvent himself through dramatic statements or public transformations. Instead, he adjusts, slowly, deliberately. And that kind of adjustment often goes unnoticed because it doesn't create headlines. But it's there, in the choices he makes, the roles he accepts, the way he speaks, and even in the way he disappears from the spotlight when he doesn't need to be in it. That's especially clear when you look at the years between major projects. There are long stretches where he isn't constantly visible, where he steps back instead of staying at the center of attention. And in an environment that rewards constant presence, that kind of restraint is unusual. It suggests that visibility isn't his main goal. Instead, there seems to be a focus on alignment, on choosing work that feels right rather than simply profitable. And that's a risky approach because it doesn't always guarantee success. There were periods in his career where that choice led to uncertainty, where films didn't perform well, where the industry questioned his momentum. But he didn't shift his approach to chase approval. He stayed consistent. And consistency over time creates something stronger than short-term success. It builds trust, not just with audiences, but with collaborators, directors, stunt teams, co-actors, people who know that when he commits to something, he commits fully. That reputation becomes its own kind of currency. You can see it clearly in the way people talk about working with him. There's a recurring theme of respect, not just for his talent, but for his presence. The idea that he shows up prepared, focused, and willing to do the work without creating unnecessary friction. And in collaborative environments, that matters more than most people realize. At the same time, there's an emotional dimension that continues to shape how he moves through the world. Loss doesn't disappear. It integrates. It becomes part of how a person sees things, how they prioritize, how they connect. And in his case, it seems to have created a deeper sensitivity towards others. That sensitivity shows up in small ways, in how he listens during interviews, in how he responds to fans, in how he acknowledges people who are often overlooked, crew members, support staff, people who don't usually receive attention. Those moments might seem minor individually, but together they create a larger picture. A picture of someone who understands what it means to be seen and what it means to be invisible, and who chooses, when possible, to make others feel visible. That perspective also changes how relationships are approached. With Alexandra Grant, the dynamic doesn't appear to be based on intensity or constant display. It feels measured, steady, and that steadiness is important, especially for someone who has experienced sudden loss. Because after loss, stability isn't just comforting, it's necessary. It becomes the foundation that allows everything else to function. And when that stability is built on mutual understanding rather than external pressure, it tends to last longer. Their shared creative work reinforces that idea. It's not about visibility or commercial success, it's about expression, about creating something that reflects internal experience rather than external expectation. And that kind of collaboration often strengthens connection in ways that are difficult to replicate elsewhere. Even the way they appear in public reflects that balance. There's no sense of performance or overexposure, just presence. Two people standing next to each other without trying to turn the moment into something larger than it needs to be. And that simplicity, in a world that often pushes towards complexity and exaggeration, becomes its own kind of statement. Looking at the broader picture, what stands out most isn't any single achievement or event, it's continuity, the ability to remain grounded while moving through environments that are nothing but stable. That continuity is what allows everything else to exist without falling apart. Career success, personal relationships, public perception, all of it depends on an underlying sense of direction. And in his case, that direction doesn't come from